It's March the 5th, 2024. I'm Dana Durnford. I hope you're doing well. It's a little late tonight, my apologies. You can call in at 709-589-4406. 709-589-4406. It comes in threes today. The crazies. So as soon as the show is late tonight, we're just going to fall right in. The first drone probe of the melted fuel inside the Fukushima Daiichi reactor is halted due to equipment glitch. That's a new one. I've never heard that one before. Usually it's just massive amount of radiation and it can't be done. Now they're... Because the anniversary is next week, so they're trying to pretend that everything is according to... the story's by Mari Yamaguchi, so you know that's going to be propaganda. The authorities, which is mind-boggling. We can call anybody in the nuclear industry an authority. I think there should be a penalty for doing it. We got a good poll tonight somewhere. Are all nuclear power plants surrounded by farms so they can use radioactive fallout to destroy our health or kill us with? And it's quite an interesting story because all nuclear power plants, except for very few which are in cities basically, are surrounded by farms. My guess is around 10 to 12 nuclear power plants out of the 407 that are operating, and everyone in history typically has been surrounded by farms, except for about 10 or 12. The authorities, again, I use that word sparingly, calling these people authorities just doesn't seem appropriate. Said they had to abandon plans to send in drones for a second day to probe one of the damaged reactors. Now they're claiming this is the number one reactor. They're claiming that's the worst damaged reactor, is the number one reactor. Because most people don't have a very good understanding of even the basics. And if you did, you would quickly realize that reactor 3 and reactor 4 were the worst reactors, and like visually anybody can look at it and say, well, the buildings are actually gone once they understand the context of what a building is. Mari Yamaguchi. It seems to be the cover story always comes from Associated Press and a particular, I don't know if they're real or not, but Mari Yamaguchi is the pseudonym that we see attached to the propaganda. They claim 2 drones successfully flew inside the Fukushima No. 1 reactor at the Daiichi plant for the first time on Wednesday. You'd have to be very gullible to believe anything this industry tells you. Some of the molten fuel debris and other damages in areas where the earlier robots have failed to reach, and the government and TEPCO plans to remove the massive amount of fatally radioactive melted nuclear fuel. Well, just the water they're pouring over the melted fuel is fatal by the liter. But they want you to believe it's in 1,000 tanks and nothing escaped. And the official story is nothing got out of these buildings. That's the official story. That remains inside of each reactor. Well, obviously, when you look at reactor 3 and 4, there is no reactor, so there can't be anything inside the reactor. And propaganda is very subtle and is done in increments from many different places. And so triple meltdown, because they don't count reactor 4. Should they have counted reactor 4? Is that crazy talk to suggest we should count this reactor, which had maybe 10 reactor cores at the top of the buildings? So calling it a triple meltdown is pretty dishonest. The daunting decommissioning process has already been delayed for years and mired by technical hurdles and a lack of data. Well, you can't decommission reactors that are already gone. You can just clean up the remains left behind. They had prepared since July to fly 4 drones. They call a fleet. A fleet. And one at a time inside the hardest hit #1 reactor primary containment vessel. Well, if there's a containment vessel and you can fly inside, there is no containment, right? But the containments were at the very top of the 4 buildings. And all 4 of the buildings, this is not an opinion now, all 4 buildings are completely gone. So this industry hates you with a passion that is hard to comprehend for the average, or the majority of the people, I want to say. The daunting decommissioning process has been delayed for years. We've done that, I think, didn't we? So the hardest hit they're claiming is the #1 reactor. Not reactor 3, not reactor 4, which obviously were the hardest hit. It's very clearly the hardest hit reactors. Now they're not going to show you these pictures and a picture of reactor 1 and claim it's the hardest hit, because that defeats propaganda, right? Excuse me. #1 reactor, primary containment vessel, in which most of the fuel in the core melted and fell to the bottom. When you look at it, there was nothing fell to the bottom. On contrary, well, #1 is to your left when it detonated, so it didn't fall to the bottom. And #3 to your right obviously didn't fall to the bottom. So you can see #1 explode and #3 explode. These are slow motion videos. And you can see the reactor cores and the fuel pools actually falling back down to Earth. And what created the massive plume to your left at #1? Let's play that shot again. One more time to your left. You can actually see the reactor core or the fuel pool being ejected out of the buildings. So they're claiming, and I'll show you a picture of reactor 1. They're putting a Kevlar sarcophagus around reactor 1 in that particular picture. That's reactor 2. Now we know these are 100% nuclear meltdowns. And the original footage, clearly reactor 3 was the hardest hit. And that was a mixed oxide fuel reactor. So when you see the detonation of reactor 1, this suggests that there's a containment vessel, which is always located at the very top of the buildings. These are the containments. It's interesting to say the least. The first 2 drones Wednesday captured images showing enough space for other 2 to reach the particular area. The TEPCO, which is not a decommissioning authority, should never been in the equation, but are left in charge, figuratively speaking, so you can blame TEPCO, a corporation, instead of the nuclear industry, which is firmly, obviously, where the guilt should be. The cause of the failure is under investigation. Simply not true. These are drones. They know why it failed. There was lethal doses everywhere. And it's hard to believe they actually did anything that they're saying. Located directly under the reactor core. Again, it doesn't exist. I showed you the detonation. How overheated fuel has dripped. Which is better, I suppose, than leaked. Or not better than leaked. At least leaked is... Now, I don't know if I've ever seen... I think I have seen the word drip used a few times, but it's pretty rare. Pretty atrocious to use the word drip. They're suggesting there's 880 tons of highly radioactive melted nuclear fuel inside the three damaged reactors. There's nothing inside the reactors themselves. The entire inventories were lost by day 6. TEPCO sent a number of probes, including a crawling robot and underwater vehicle inside of each reactor, which is simply not true. The reactors don't exist. You can't go inside. If you can go inside the reactors, then there's no containment, right? Then they show you these pictures. And so that was supposed to be a video, and it turned out to be the American aid drop in Gaza, where half of the payload was dropped into the ocean. So the Gazans, who are absolutely emaciated, so very deceptive, because I refreshed the page and I played the video again, and sure enough, it brought you to the Gaza aid drop, but it doesn't show you where it's actually dropping into the ocean. It shows you where some of it landed on land. China calls for strengthening international supervision over Fukushima nuclear wastewater discharge. Wastewater. This whatever is coming out of these buildings is not wastewater. If you take a liter of it and it was sitting in this room, I'd be dead before I got this far in my video. Just from the gamma shines, the neutron bombardments, the X-rays, the beta rays, the emissions, the energy. And gamma pulses energy around 600 feet. So it'll pulse it right through one side of the house, out the other side of the house, and into the next house with ease. And it'll radiate everything in it. And I do mean everything. It's really something how evil nuclear really is. So China, Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan are working together with the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is a tool for the industry to disguise its malfeasance. China, a permanent representative to the International Atomic Energy Agency. They got a permanent representative. So if they're corrupted, then it's permanent corruption, right? And you can't participate in that organization unless you are corrupted. He speak during the March meeting of International Atomic Energy Agency, which doesn't have any sovereignty over anybody's country. Nuclear contaminated wastewater for the crippled. All of these words are are meant to lull you into complacency, to leave you blinded in both eyes and all your senses. A Chinese envoy on Monday who's very motivated to lie about nuclear because they're expanding their nuclear program. And if they were honest, then there's no way that the nuclear proliferation in that country could exist without. Well, China is a one-party. It's not even a one-party. It's just a dictatorship, right? There is no dissenting voices on top of that. In disregard of the opposition for neighboring countries and concerns of the international community, Japan has so far arbitrarily discharged over 23,000 tons of nuclear contaminated water into the ocean. Now, this is 2013 pictures, but the buildings, the official, the original documentation, and I'll bring up some of it, clearly shows that there is nothing left. Every academic in the nuclear industry, when they looked at this original picture, which was out there on day 4 and 5, circulating worldwide in the main media, just threw up their hands and said, well, it's gone. And so all of the nuclear industry has perpetrated a vicious crime upon all the species, and particularly your health, of nuclear contaminated wastewater into the ocean. So it right away, it's hemorrhaging radiation into the environment. There is no containment. You can't filter this kind of stuff. It simply can't be done. You can't step over the hoses or the pipes that are bringing water. You can't pour water over this and put a hose down there, for instance, and suck the water out and put it anywhere, let alone in a tank. Because if you fill up a tank, it's 1.4 million sieverts per tank of just beta, because these are numbers that they acknowledge at 2.2 sieverts per liter, and you can't just have beta. 3 sieverts is a lethal dose. 4 to 5 sieverts, say 2 liters. We're only acknowledging beta, which is impossible not to have the rest of it there, is a lethal dose to every human on the planet. There really isn't any Spider-Man. There's no Hulks. Simpsons is fake. So, like, all these caricatures of the nuclear industry are meant to lull you again into complacency. Of nuclear contaminated wastewater into the ocean started the 4th round of wastewater release last week. Well, obviously, there's not 4. It's never started last. The 4th round never started last week. The 4th round started on the 5th day. And then the 6th day was another round. The 7th day was another round. And we have thousands of rounds where it's hemorrhaging. And every time it snows and every time it rains and typhoons, it's hemorrhaging. The whole continent is hemorrhaging radiation into the ecosystem. The whole country of Japan is completely contaminated. Not just a little bit of Japan, but the entire country. Maybe I'll explain that a bit more at the end of the story. Nuclear contaminated wastewater into the ocean started 4th round last week. So what they're claiming is that nothing has been released in 13 years from these buildings. Nothing. And there's 4 of them. And at the top of them were decades of reactor cores at each building, which we assume is 8 to 10 reactor cores, because they don't have a repository anywhere on the planet to store it. Excuse me. The amount of emissions we're talking about are catastrophic to everything with replicating cells. Japan's wastewater release has severely impacted the international nuclear safety system, and by using the International Atomic Energy Agency to endorse it, which is not a regulatory agency. They don't have any sovereignty over any country. They're basically a think tank for the United Nations, which is widely recognized as a military-industrial complex. Japan has seriously undermined the agency's credibility. The Chinese ambassador to the International Atomic Energy Agency, which should never exist in any conversation. The words International Atomic Energy Agency should never exist. It has nothing to do with any kind of safety. It's 100% the big brother of the nuclear industry. They urged Japan to stop the release. So they're complaining about tritium, and they're suggesting nothing got out only since August the 24th. And I can take you through detail by detail by detail, the minutiae of the minutiae, and what you ultimately understand. So let's challenge the assertion that nothing got out, only since August the 24th. It's just humor. Give me a moment. And I'll bring up documentation that clearly shows that their assertions is just terrifying propaganda. These are always difficult stories to try to articulate, but we have a neat way of doing it. So I'm just going to go through random parts of Japan. So 30,000 square kilometers of Japan was blanketed by radioactive cesium. And cesium pulses energy around 600 feet every second. So 30,000 square kilometers is pulsing energy. Every millimeter is covered in energy every second, pulsing at almost the speed of light. This is dangerous to everything with replicating cells. So in Tokyo, right away, after 100 hours, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission says radiation levels were up in Tokyo. But how is that possible when nothing got out of the buildings, right? France says Japan's lost control. The French shall leave the country. Government says 1,500 tons of highly radioactive sludge may end up as soil for gardens, sludge. But it's not 1,500 tons, it's 50,000 tons of sludge. But it's not the typical sludge the average person would envision. It's actually sediment from the water filtration facilities at just a single city. In 2011, had 50,000 tons of sediment from water filtration. So your water filtration cannot filter out radiation, for instance. It's going to get caught up, obviously, in some of the filters, but that's going to be maybe 10% of the radiation. The rest of it is going to be coming down the taps of the homes and the washing machines, in the baths for the children, in the hot tubs for the families that are using, etc. It's in the food you're cooking and the water you're drinking. And when you wash your house, you're washing it with radioactive water. So when you see something like this, what it means is you're supposed to abandon those communities because the pipes are radioactive too. But your water filtration system is now officially compromised. And so the adverse effects from something like that you would expect to be significant. And so in the first year, it was the only year they released the statistics of excess cancers. It was 865,000 extra cancers. And cancer is just one of the many illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries and illnesses from radiation. So in the first year, there was extra 865,000. Not everybody had health care. Not everybody was diagnosed. And cancer is just one of the many diseases: heart, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, etc., etc., etc. And everything with replicating cells has no autoimmune trigger to defend against it. So it's not just going to be humans, it's every species. It's going to be, and the species are going to be more severely impacted. Highly radioactive sewage 30 miles from Fukushima plant at 334,000. These are catastrophic numbers. And when you see the word Becquerel, think of an atom, a physical, anthropogenic, man-made atom that is pulsing energy at the speed of light every second. And that's what a Becquerel is. A Becquerel is that energy almost at the speed of light every second. Cesium level, and so cesium, so you got, which is a gamma, so you got gammas, alphas, neutrons, and betas. And so all of them are almost at the speed of light. But alpha is slightly slower than the other three. Now, when you're talking about almost the speed of light, a little bit slower, we're only talking about a few thousand miles per second difference. And that the industry will not acknowledge the speeds. They'll just say, well, that's a slower emitter, so it's not as bad. But they're all almost at the speed of light, so the discrepancy doesn't really matter, because when it hits your chromosomes, your DNA, and your cells, etc., it annihilates it. And your body has to repair that every second and attack the source. So your body is overwhelmed immediately with a cause and effect, and your immune system now is permanently compromised, which leaves you more susceptible immediately to pathogens and viruses that were normally harmless. So when your excrement, your stool, your sewage is at 334,000 atoms per kilogram. This is just unimaginable. This is pre-Fukushima. This is inconceivable numbers. And you wouldn't even do like a science fiction show pre-Fukushima that would suggest that the community's sewage was so radioactive it had these particular attributes. You simply wouldn't conceive of doing a science fiction, a fantasy show with these kinds of numbers. They were unimaginable. They were simply unimaginable numbers. Debris from near the nuclear meltdowns is being ground up and burned in other parts of Japan. You're talking several billion pounds of highly radioactive materials taken to incinerators in communities across the country, which I can't even wrap my mind around, and then burn, and you can't destroy the radiation, so that's liberated into the environment. But remember, let's go back to the foundation, is that nothing got out. So no matter what I show you, as of July the 13th, 2023, none of this is no longer true. They have disappeared, all this information, despite the fact that we have, and you know, you can see all of these stories are from different medias, but they were all aggregated. Will continue for years and over £1 billion. Disposal of the quake debris. So why would you take quake debris and bring it to Tokyo, a couple hundred kilometers away, and burn it, radioactive at that, and burn it in the incinerators? There. This is, obviously there's an agenda going on, and it's not good for anything or anybody on this planet. And when you look at the bigger picture, and I'm just going to run through a bunch of this. They found plutonium in every sample. It's everywhere. 350 atoms per kilogram in the garbage facilities. So the water filtration, the sewage, the garbage, and the ash from the incinerators is too radioactive to get rid of. Is the government trying to contaminate every region of Japan by burning the radioactive debris? If everyone is contaminated in a relative sense, nobody is? But that don't even make any sense. If I poison everybody, then nobody's poisoned, right? So it doesn't make any sense, because this is poison. This is the worst poison. It's 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. So it's not a game. And it escapes people, the urgency of what I'm talking about. Because unfortunately, I overwhelm the average person with so much. It you know, and I understand it, but you become a bit numb to the significance of it. Incinerating radioactive material could contaminate the environment. Fukushima plant, by the way, all nuclear power plants have incinerators. Japan had built 2 brand new massive ones at the Fukushima Daiichi plant itself. And so why would you do that there for? Because you're burning the radioactive debris at the site. So the site is not going to be manned by international scientists. It's going to be, unfortunately, manned by the most vulnerable of society. The incinerators are running around the clock. So you're not burning building material, you're burning radioactive material. And we have headlines there somewhere we've covered forever, where TEPCO said they were burning 7,000 paper suits a day. That's the actual story. Iodine 131 levels rise 350 kilometers away from Fukushima, the sewage plant, and is transforming into other isotopes. So everything is this. The garbage is radioactive, the sewage is radioactive, the water filtration is radioactive, the ashes from the incinerators are so radioactive you can't get rid of any of it. And it's falling out continuously. The reactors are perpetually melting down. 10 miles, and they're burning debris 10 miles from the plant. So we have this enormous amount of documentation that this happened. And the official story is July the 13th, 2023, is that it didn't happen. They moved the goalpost. And so slowly but surely, the majority of the population that is starting to pay attention is going to get the propaganda, the new propaganda, which is cooked up and quantified by the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is not a regulatory agency. Severe impacts of oceanic environment, an unpredictable amount of damage to the Pacific, but it's just not the Pacific. And the research that we're doing now in the Atlantic is showing catastrophic, not catastrophic. And then instead of people trying to protect themselves and doing due diligence, checking sources of where the food is coming from is a good start, they're simply just unable to comprehend it. They get overwhelmed by it, and they refuse to take any action whatsoever. This is the wrong approach. An unpredictable amount of damage to the Pacific, which is the biggest producer of oxygen. One of the first things we noticed was it wiped out the phytoplankton, not just in the oceans, but the fresh water too. Fundamental to the reproductions of humans, Japan is simply dumping the nuclear waste into the sea. You can't contain it, you can't filter it, because you can never change the filters. Massive radioactive waste buildup in Tokyo suburbs. Tokyo official blast appearance want kids to avoid ingesting radioactivity at school. It's important to share the pain. And these are not hyperbole. These are not opinions or conjectures or anything else. That's what the teachers and the principals and the academics are doing to the students. Because otherwise they can't stay in the community. So Koriyama City is so radioactive they have to shield the students, which doesn't work by the way, with bottles filled with water inside and outside the classroom. And this is 35 miles away from the nuclear meltdowns. And every building in the community was entitled to be decontaminated, but you actually can't decontaminate a building. Surge in radioactive cesium levels cause incinerators near Tokyo to shut down. Radioactive fallout around Fukushima incinerator plants are being hidden. Of course they are. Tokyo neighbor cesium approaching levels found in Fukushima that the ashes left over from the incineration are so high they're considered dirty bombs by the kilogram. But they're only acknowledging cesium. So you got to include 1,000 isotopes in order to be honest. So every number you see, you want to multiply it by about 600. But pretending it's not happening is not a solution. And you're allowing them now to get away with crimes that are unimaginable. Fukushima will start burning radioactive waste at 100,000 becquerels a kilogram, which is what they were putting into 30 million one-ton bags. The criteria for the bags was at least 100,000 becquerels a kilogram. And there's 1,000 kilograms in each of the one-ton bags, and there's 30 million of them. Which in one-ton trucks, bumper to bumper, is 5 rows of traffic, bumper to bumper, around the entire planet. They got 1 billion pounds of debris in the exclusion zones. 1 billion pounds here, they're burning 1 billion pounds over there. The numbers are numbers that we've pre-Fukushima have never even conceived. And this mysterious black substance, which is an algae that seems to bioaccumulate radiation at 1 million atoms per kilogram of just gamma cesium, which is a very powerful emitter. But the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rod is the curium isotopes. And for instance, curium isotopes, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. And they're also seeing the same attributes in Tokyo, on all the roofs and the sidewalks where the children are walking back and forth to school. 10 million atoms of cesium detected in Minnesota soil samples. Now, they moved the children back to schools there within 7 years. And there seems to be this fixation on taking the most vulnerable of society, bringing them back into the nuclear wasteland, and using that to quantify other people moving back into the community. Because if you've got a child there, you typically got a few more people in the family who are going to be moving there. But if you get an elderly person move back, a lot of times they're just by themselves. So if you can get the child to move back, then you can raise the number up quite quickly to disguise the reality. And this is what they're doing. The Japanese government did not reveal plutonium-241 detections. The doses was 50 times higher than the total of the 3 other plutonium isotopes that were mentioned. So the ratio, for instance, of iodine-131 works the same way as the plutonium, for instance. So, in other words, for every iodine-131, which is a terrible isotope, it's a gamma, there's 10 times more 132, there's going to be 30 times more 133, 31 times more iodine-129. So it's the same thing with the plutonium. The plutonium 238 to 239 to 240, the ratio keeps going up of the creation of them, right? So for every iodine-131, there's 10 times more 132. And then that's going to be the same kind of scenario for the plutonium. But the biggest byproduct, again, is going to be the curium isotope. And this is why we call the nuclear meltdowns curium. And that isotope killed all the animals in all the experiments. And they all died of 3 tumors. When they died, they had 3 different tumors, the liver, the bones, and the lungs. And the bone was the biggest killer, which was around 80% of the animals that die will die of the bone tumor first, which for children and animals and insects and everything else means you're going to mutate the stem cells right away too, which leads to incredible amount of autoimmune illnesses. Possibly 20 million atoms of cesium in the mysterious black substance that wasn't measured. It's too dangerous, must be analyzed by public institutions, but these institutions are not your friends. 50,000 atoms, a kilogram of radioactive cesium, you got to multiply it by 66.6 to get a square meter. I'm not kidding you, that's the number you have to multiply it by. 66.6 to get a square meter. There's no irony in that one, is it? A radioactive cesium found in soil near Tokyo. And it's terrifying, the soils are from the side of the roads. So you got to multiply by 66.6 to get where a child would stand up and wait for the school bus. And we're only talking about cesium. These are unconscionable numbers. And so in the first year, children's thyroid tumors, one study was 13,646 out of 38,000, which is 358,000 out of a million when you scale it up. And because the typical thyroid is 3 by 5 centimeters, the tumors are 2 centimeters. This is a huge tumor on something so small, right? But remember, the thyroid is making hormones for your body, the birds, insects, animals, mammals' bodies, right? And the kids. Now, the child's tumor, thyroid, is very small compared to an adult, which is 3 by 5 centimeters. So when a child has a 2 centimeter tumor, that's a massive tumor because a child's thyroid is very tiny compared to an adult, which is tiny. But when you're producing radioactive hormones, then there's an absurd host of illnesses and diseases that are going to manifest. 6 out of 10 Fukushima children with diabetes. And there's also 14.2% per 100,000 live births that have need open heart surgery, which is 14,200 children when they're born need open heart surgery in Japan and across the entire country. Government-funded researchers have sounded the alarm calling for immediate monitoring. 175 billion becquerels, atoms, flow per day in just one river in one city 60 kilometers from the meltdown. And that's a lot, but it's not a lot in the scope of how many atoms are created by a gram. And some of the numbers we're seeing, like for iodine-131, you can get 124,000 curies. 124,000 curies per gram, according to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And a curie is 37 billion atoms. Radioactivity of 615 million becquerels, atoms, per square meter detected 60 kilometers from the meltdown. These are just absurd, but the official story is nothing got out. Despite the fact that a Tokyo professor was shown that every organism in Fukushima Prefecture is contaminated with radiation, every organism. And so 1.4 million atoms per kilogram in the worm's excrement, the feces, 60 kilometers from a meltdown. Like, this stuff breaks my heart. It's very difficult for me sometimes to tell this story because I get overwhelmed. And I'm cursed because I'm covering this constantly, right? And so I'm dedicated to the story. I'm dedicated to telling the story because it's such an important... There is no more important story. And it consumes you when you're at it as much as I am. And those who follow me regularly are going to be similarly affected because they're inundated with an absurd amount of documentation that I lovingly provide in the hopes that the world will come to its senses, because it has to. But in order for it to come to the senses, the nuclear industry has to be held accountable in a way that it's never ever perceived before. The world has to turn on the nuclear industry, just on the happen chance that we can have a future, which doesn't look good. Tokyo neighbors seismic approaching levels found in Fukushima. The Chiba, which is right alongside of Tokyo, 20 kilometers away. The incinerator dust is too radioactive to get rid of. The garbage itself is too radioactive to get rid of. The water filtration sediment is too radioactive to get rid of. The sewage is too radioactive to get rid of. 500,000 atoms a kilogram of radioactive cesium. And you notice how cesium gets mentioned perpetually? It's, which is just one of 1,000 fission products you need to worry about. 75 miles from Fukushima. So let me just keep jumping further ahead because we're at 75 miles out right now. And what we're doing is we're walking away from the reactors. But you're not seeing a big discrepancy in the numbers, right? I just think it's really important because the anniversary is right around the corner next week, next Monday. And that the official story is that nothing got out, but clearly this got out. Clearly these are not numbers that we've recorded pre-Fukushima anywhere on the planet. We've never seen numbers like this before. And because Japan is a prolific farms, the food that they're producing is a prodigious amount. You're talking each prefecture at over 1 billion pounds, and they're shipping that worldwide. All nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms also, worldwide, and that's used now to destroy your integrity, your health, and this is not an accident. This is planned right from the engineering all the way back into the 50s. This has been planned. And they're still doing the exact same thing today. If you look at the new nuclear power plants, for instance, they're building in the United Kingdom. They're built on existing sites that are surrounded by farms. It's with a 67-year legacy of poisoning the supermarkets perpetually. Fukushima 311 follow figures released over 4 million atoms in a major city, and it didn't come from iodine or the much talked about cesium. 100 kilometers away, you're getting thorium. Japan says the air, 150 kilometers from the Fukushima plant, is radioactive as the areas close to the meltdowns. It's high level of radioactivity found extensively. This is NHK, who currently is telling you, the current, which is the government media, so the current administration is suggesting everything I showed you is not true. Despite the fact that these are their numbers, official numbers, but now they have burned the books, and these numbers are no, unless you find them right here, you probably will never see these numbers. High levels of radioactive material found in Tokyo, 170,000 atoms a kilogram in the slag, approaches levels found in Fukushima. Slag is the sewage. And 170,000 atoms per kilogram in your sewage means that whoever is creating that is terribly polluted. It's heartbreakingly polluted with radiation. It's catastrophically contaminated with radiation internally. Fallout from Fukushima causing problems 180 kilometers away. So now we're up. We just marched from the site out to 180 kilometers. It's all become no good. Contaminated wild vegetables, fish, and wild game. It's all no good. Mysterious radioactive substances 180 kilometers from Fukushima Daiichi. Alpha particles at 200 kilometers per minute. So, and another problem is that when you got cesium, it's drowning out the signals from alphas and gammas, for instance, other gammas, and it's drowning out the betas and stuff like that because it's such a powerful signal that you can't. Now, this is also going to tritiate all the water that it comes in those communities. Everything. The water table, everything is now tritiated water. It's symmetrical throughout the entire ecosystem. Well, and these are heartbreaking stories a lot of the times where you got elementary schools of 4 million atoms per square meter of gamma, which pulses energy around 600 feet every second, and soil samples from schools in Chiba, which is 20 kilometers from Tokyo. But to measure it in microsieverts, which is the USV, is simply dishonest because the atoms are physical. When you see Becquerels, you're talking about physical atoms. You're talking about physical atoms. 27,000 atoms per kilogram of cesium in kindergarten. These are 180 atoms, by the way, or Becquerels per kilogram, for instance, is considered an exclusion zone at a nuclear plant pre-Fukushima because it's so radioactive. So 27,000 atoms, and let's just do the math on that to give you some kind of context. So you're going to multiply 27,000 by 66.6 to get a square meter. Where a kid will stand up and spin around with their arms out, right? So times 66.6 is 1.7 million atoms, 1.8 million atoms. These are terrifying numbers. These are absolutely, unequivocally just. And how far away were we? We were 200 kilometers away. So 200 kilometers. So the entire country is radioactive. Every kilogram is. So imagine every time it rains, how much it is. Because the numbers we're talking, and the material we're talking about, is going to radiate the tree leaves, the foliage in the litter on the floor. The insects are becoming sterilized and not reproducing, etc., etc. Tokyo, 230 kilometers away, 240 kilometers away, because Tokyo has 36 million people, it's quite big, as contaminated as Fukushima. And that the air samples in Tokyo, these numbers are unbelievable, at 270 times as contaminated with just gamma, the cesium-137, which is the gamma, then global weapons fallout peak. Global weapons fallout peak, which was catastrophic, but is nothing compared to Fukushima. So the global weapons fallout peak, which was catastrophic and induced the cancer epidemics in this which started in basically, or was recognized in the 70s. So when the air samples itself were 270 times more contaminated with just the gammas. So you got gammas and alphas and neutrons and betas, and they're pulsing energy almost at the speed of light. Slight variations of each one of these emitters, but they're generally all close to the speed of light, which is series energy. Okay, so but when they hit each other, they don't mingle. This is unbelievably important facet to this story. So when gammas and alphas and neutrons and betas they smash into each other, they change direction. And that creates an X-ray. And when you got as much as we're talking about, it means the whole ecosystem is getting full body x-rays. You, your loved ones, the birds, the insects. And so slowly but surely, they can't reproduce. And so in increments over the last 13 years and over the last 80 years on top of that, and you can trace the absolute decline of the species to the inception of the nuclear industry and the nuclear bomb testing. That's where we see the decline of the species nosedive and the variety, and the industry is well aware of this. Forecast shows Tokyo under radiation threat on Sunday, March the 20th, which is Bloomberg, which denies now that any of this happened. SKF shows radioactive plumes of krypton-85, which is a terrible isotope, by the way. And the plume, we're talking about around 400,000 atoms, disposition of around 400,000 atoms per square meter. But the airborne, so you got all these poisons, because a single atom is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison of the same quantity. It doesn't take only a single atom to cause an autoimmune trigger in your body. And your body doesn't have an immune trigger to defend against it, so it attacks it relentlessly with white blood cells, because that's what it does with a foreign object that it doesn't recognize. So 300,000 atoms per square meter radioactive iodine deposited in areas near Tokyo before the end of March. And they're only talking about the 131, but there's 10 times more 132, 30 times more 133, 31 times more iodine 129, for instance. And so the iodine 132, 133 is actually 10 times more effective at ionizing and radiating your thyroid glands than the incredibly effective 131 is. But they're very short half-lives, so there's 10 half-lives. But the problem with that equation also was that the damage is permanent and is very intensive. So if you're infected with it, it's severe damage and it's permanent. But also the iodine 129 is very long. It's got a 15 million year half-life. So with 10 half-life, that's 150 million years. And what that means, though, is the ecosystem has no chance of recovery. And so when I'd done research expeditions for 6 years, the first year we discovered it was an extinction event. The species were annihilated. But we had to go back each year to see if the species recovered. And so it was an average of 4 to 5 and sometimes 6 months a year on the ocean without coming home. Desperation, the first year, I was hoping to find an oasis of the ecosystem. But it was a total symmetrical annihilation. But I had to go prove it to myself that first year, which was a terrible, terrible year. And I've been under siege ever since. But because we have the moral high ground, and we have, unfortunately, an overwhelming amount of documentation, you know, if 8 billion people were aware of this issue, you'd be surprised how many people are clever out there will come up with solutions. And the solutions might not be something we even can perceive right now. But there are solutions for water filtration, there's solutions for air filtrations, for mitigation, for even solutions for cures. But you can't come up with solutions for all of it, unfortunately. But at least you can come up with some solutions. So there hopefully can be a future. And that's what we're fighting. We're fighting so the world can have a future. Because we don't. High radiation levels near Tokyo linked to Fukushima. Of course, where else could it come from? And a single rain out caused 29 million atoms a square meter in soil. 29 million atoms. This is insane. This truly is the definition of insane, right? That a single rainfall can contaminate your cities in your country permanently. So it's a curse, isn't it? Tokyo drinking water unsafe for infants. Well, it's unsafe for children. It's unsafe for every human. It's unsafe for pets. It's unsafe for animals. It's unsafe for insects. It's unsafe. It can't just be unsafe for infants. And Boris Johnson, 2 years before he was removed from office, had removed the restrictions on baby food, and cereal for United Kingdom. And then the year that he was removed, 2 years later, just before he was moved, about a month before he was moved, he removed the restrictions for everybody else in the United Kingdom for food from the nuclear wasteland. So it's not only unconscionable, it's unfathomable that your so-called leader would remove the restrictions first for the most vulnerable of society, the infants and the children. Because who's going to eat the cereal the most are the children, right? Even today, I can't reconcile that. And it's true, about 70% of Japan's territory is polluted by the Fukushima radioactive material. But the official story now is that it's not. That nothing happened, nothing escaped, there was no meltdowns. There was meltdown, but there was no releases, and everything is in 1,000 tanks. And these are not even fantasies. These are switching baits. These are meant to manipulate you so the nuclear industry can exist a little bit longer. This is a model from the French government itself, and it's based upon 1 million to 10 million atoms of cesium-137 per cubic meter of air. And it's based upon, in this particular model, a little over 20 days of radioactive fallout. And I put this green, which I think was snow, right? And I can manipulate the colors with the equipment that I have. And so I use green to help articulate that this is what we're talking about, covering the planet. But this is not 20 million atoms per cubic meter. If I put 20 million atoms in this frame, you can't actually see the map behind it. Or 10 million atoms of cesium-137. But if you do got 10 million atoms of cesium-137, you got 220 million atoms of iodine-129, for instance. And many, many others at incredible numbers. And because iodine-129 is such a long life, you guarantee the extinction of the species just on that capacity. It's a slow kill, but you eventually sterilize all the species because you overwhelm the thyroid glands of insects and spiders and salamanders and snakes and birds and animals and everything. You slowly sterilize them. And then the newborns are not able to develop because you have compromised them in the womb. Local government, 276,000 becquerels a kilogram of radioactive cesium from soil samples near Tokyo at almost 18 million becquerels a square meter. So let's do some math again. I want you to see this. I got to bring it up, I guess. 18 million divided by 276,000. That's what we're going to do. 18 million divided by 276,000. So we got 18 million divided by 276,000. And it's going to equal 65.2. But when you look at the actual real numbers, what you end up with is 66.6. Fittingly, appropriately, unfortunately, is the equation. In order, you want to multiply 276,000 by 66.6 to get the square meter. And that they want to make you incapable of comprehending even the very basics, let alone the foundations. Again, cesium, not uranium, not plutonium, not curium, not americium or neptunium, not strontium. But you see this perpetual connotations of cesium. I just want to show you there are other things. This model is based on Neptunium-239 dispersal after 20 days. This model is based on Xenon-133. I believe this model is based on 20 days or something when it finishes. This model is based on plutonium-239. That's based on 20 days of radioactive fallout. So you're hearing cesium and all these stories, but cesium doesn't do it justice. So when you think about cesium, in other words, you got to realize that all these other isotopes are in that plume, and because they can find cesium, and cesium's very terrible, unbelievably miscible isotope to be infected with, because it's an infection, right? And that the doctors in the 50s described radioactive fallout as a biological weapon, which was actually appropriate, because it can irradiate everything around you, and by proxy, you get sick from that. Not just the foundation, but from everything that is infected and radiated. 300,000 atoms a square meter radioactive iodine deposited in areas near Tokyo before the end of March, and it only includes iodine-131. Tokyo area soil testing finds radioactivity to Chernobyl relocation levels at almost 1 million atoms per square meter. 180 atoms at a nuclear site per square meter, actually, is considered an abandoned zone, an evacuation zone. You don't go in that area. So they raised the bar very high in the public world before they would evacuate you, but not on the sites themselves. Nothing to fear, said the government. And then came the test results of 1.5 million atoms near a church in the capital of Tokyo, 36 million people. And the doctors find uranium and zirconium in Tokyo residents' fingernails were becoming nuclear fuel rods. So you got, I showed you iodine, zirconium, uranium, neptunium, plutonium. There's many different xenon, which one is it? The Superman, the krypton. There it is, right there, actually. Krypton isotopes. So there's many other isotopes that you definitely need to worry about. So 40,000 microsievers. So think of a microsiever as each microsiever. Now we're going to lowball the numbers. It's 750 counts. So multiply 750 by 40,000 just to get, say, a single gamma. And it's very dishonest, by the way, to measure it in microsievers because we're talking about physical atoms. Where microsievers implies just energy. But because this is not just energy, you're breathing this in. So the energy is good for the nuclear site when conditions are perfect, but it's no good for the real world when you have a nuclear accident. So the neutron rays are measured in Tokyo, uranium-235 in Chiba, and it can't be detected by Geiger counters. Neither can all the other isotopes I showed you. And you can barely detect the cesium with a gamma. A typical Geiger counter basically is very inefficient, but it'll detect only gamma, just a fraction of the gamma that is actually present. And the black stuff is on the roof. It's everywhere. They're talking about at 5, 10, 20 million atoms per kilogram. The fog is so radioactive. These are just over the top. This is over the top stuff. The fog, you can't breathe the air. The fog is incredibly radioactive. 50,000 atoms a kilogram of cesium in the soil near Tokyo. We covered that one, I think. Contamination in Tokyo suburbs 3 times higher than the area a mile from Fukushima. A significant contamination of Tokyo. Japanese Prime Minister studies setting up alternative capitals away from Tokyo. And that's NHK. The Upper House Budget Committee meeting. The Japan Prime Minister suggesting he will study the possibility of setting up an alternative capital to take over Tokyo's role in emergency. And this was based upon the radioactive fallout that had made Tokyo uninhabitable. And they were going to have staff for 200,000 slaves or something, too. So what was the date on this one? That was May the 1st. This is November the 3rd. Japan unveils more plans to develop a massive government backup city 300 miles west of Tokyo with room for 200,000 staff. In fact, they had set up another one. There was another study where they were going to set up the government in India. In India. For the Japanese government because Japan is too radioactive. Local Tokyo officials says it became clear that the radiation came further south than we thought, all the way to Tokyo, and at the nursery school with kids rolling in the dirt and tasting the radiation. And I got a folder there on schools and nurseries and kindergartens. And several hundred stories from the medias about everything is radioactive. And that they would take the children on bus trips 100 kilometers so they can have a day outdoors. And for the first 2 years, the majority of the children didn't go outdoors unless they were going to school. And all of it's in a nuclear wasteland. So the government decided to sacrifice you so they can keep their jobs and their pensions. And because of their contempt for you. Their unwavering, unrelenting contempt for you and all the other species. Reuters obtained secret Tokyo evacuation. That's February the 17th, 2012. So that's 3 different stories, right? And key points from the scenario documents obtained. Sketches of scenarios and contingencies at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Lots of cooling functions at 6 reactors, etc., etc. Where they would evacuate the capital, the government would leave you behind to pay the bills and taxes and everything else. An alarming government report discusses Tokyo exodus and collapse of the spent fuel pool 4 as the rods melted through. So if reactor 4 melted down is what they're saying, right? So if that happened to reactor 4, which by the way is reactor 4, you should have abandoned Tokyo. And that the headlines I showed you quantifies those assertions already. The actual documentation and radioactive fallout from the Japanese government themselves, who now says that never happened. Absorbed radiation doses iodine-132 was 10 times higher than the 131 in northern Japan. And plus the iodine-132 is 9 times more effective at irradiating the thyroid gland. And the iodine-131 is unbelievably effective. So imagine how terrible 132 actually is. Unbelievable energy from these isotopes. The radioactive black substance found 230 kilometers from Fukushima plant seems to be everywhere. 230 million atoms per square meter. So when you see a Becquerel, that's a pulse of energy from an atom. And the atom will pulse energy maybe forever. So you want to think of it that way instead of a short term. Because that's more appropriate. Because a lot of the isotopes are never ever acknowledged, never mentioned, and can't be found by unless you got we got to have a $50,000 piece of equipment. It's got to be surrounded by lead bricks, and then you got to have something to calibrate the equipment in order to find the isotope that you're looking for. So it's a very costly, very complicated, and a very small segment of society has access to this equipment. And they ain't going to tell you the truth. Talking about 230,000 atoms per square meter of cesium, again, 6 times the size limit set for radiation control zones. But at a nuclear plant, the control zone is 180 atoms. And a government session reveals 400,000 times normal radioactive xenon-133 levels in Chiba, but Washington was 450,000 times of the xenon-133, which will burn a hole right through your lung and sequester in your bone and mutate your stem cells. So technetium-99 detected outside of Fukushima, And they look for that because it's such a long half-life, right? It's a very dangerous isotope. And the man-made isotope with a long half-life is very dangerous for its entire half-life. Whereas natural stuff with a long half-life is harmless. We're already acclimated to through genetic space selection. And so the long half-life, like say plutonium or curium or something like that, or uranium-235 or whatever, maintains its energy long past the human experience. It's like the iodine-129, the anthropogenic, man-made, the man-made. Because there is natural stuff, and they conflate these together to fool you and to manipulate you and to coerce you into giving up your health and your medical autonomy. Strontium-90 found 245 kilometers from Meltdowns in Yokohama City is 150 times background. 245 kilometers. So now we're way past Tokyo. And by the way, strontium-90 doesn't peak until the first 1,000 days, which is like the first 3 years basically. And then it's 100 strontium-90s for every cesium-137. That's the ratio. And the peak lasts tens of thousands of days. Like 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 days. So let's just do 30,000 days. And strontium-90 is a bone seeker. So let's say 33,000 days. Divide that by 365. And so the peak production from the sites last 90 years of the ratio of 100 to 1 of strontium-90 is 100 to 1 of cesium-137, rather. But that starts after the first 1,000 days. So let's do one more math equation. 365 days times 13 years. So Monday is 13 years. So there's 4,745 days of radiation hemorrhaging from multiple meltdowns. High levels of strontium-90, 250 kilometers from the meltdown. Officials carefully examining where the isotopes came from. Well, they came from multiple nuclear meltdowns. They're like these numbers can only be from Fukushima, unless they hit other nuclear meltdowns in Japan, which is a 100% possibility. And there's nothing you would put past this industry. 24,000 atoms a kilogram, pulsing every second, of radioactive cesium again, cesium. 250 kilometers from Fukushima. Over 30,000 atoms per square meter in Nagano, 250, which is on the other side on the east side, is over towards the Noto Peninsula, Ishikawa Prefecture, over Niigata Prefecture area. Towards Russia, towards North Korea, South Korea area. Absorbed radiation doses iodine-132, 10 times higher, we covered that. Strontium found in 2,200 locations just in Fukushima. 2,200 locations. So they looked for it and they found it everywhere they looked. But this was 2011 before the full ratio kicked in, which was around 1,000 days. So the official story is nothing got out of these buildings. That never happened, and if it did happen, nothing got out. That's the official story. Nothing got out. And at the top of the buildings was decades of reactor cores. You know, it's hard to appreciate how overwhelmed I am, right? And I get complacent, and I show up here every night, and I can't thank everybody. I don't remember to, right? My mind is scattered. I'm at this all day long. I'm just stressed. And thank God somebody's doing it is all I can say. I wish it was somebody else. But then again, I don't. I'm grateful that I do it. And that sounds one of the most bizarre statements I'll ever make for myself. But I'm glad I do it. But it's hard. You gotta appreciate where I'm coming from. And so a lot of the times you're gonna see me. I'm gonna invoke different emotions. Some days I'm gonna be angry. Some days I'm gonna be just obnoxious. Some days I'm gonna be funny. Some days I'm quite serious. Some days I'm whatever tonight happens to be. Right, and so you're gonna get all these ranges of emotions. And I don't know if I should apologize or not. There's no consistency. Because every day it's madness. This is madness. What I do is actually, if I sat down with a psychiatrist, the psychiatrist would probably have to go see a psychiatrist. Because it's madness. And you just can't sit down with a stranger and articulate this. Because the stranger's going to get up and run away. Yeah, you're crazy. Stay away from that guy. He's crazy. Right? Because stay away from this guy. He's crazy. He just sits there and he's yelling all these numbers, or he's just talking all this stuff, and it doesn't mean nothing. Because the school is dumb. Public schools have dumbed down the population that they don't care about nothing. They don't care about nothing. Nothing instant gratification, right? Everything is me. It's a me, I society. And it has no forgiveness whatsoever. It's very, very self-centered society. And even though the average person has good intentions, they just can't sit there and absorb it. They can't seem to absorb the significance of why this is important and why this is urgent and why this is necessary to talk about this subject. And I don't begrudge people for not. I don't. And I don't blame anybody from just throwing their hands up and running away. Saying it's total madness. Who cares? I don't want to know. Don't tell me. Give it up. Stop it. I don't begrudge people. Because I get it. It is madness. It is insanity. It has every one of those attributes. This is insanity. But what is my driving force? What drives me? What makes me me? Well, why is it that I'm able to sit here and do this every night? Because my nightmares are real. I know they're never going to go away. So something so, who cares, is a destroyed building, a burnt building, Dana? You should see forest fires that run through the community. There's all kinds of burnt buildings, Dana. It means nothing to you, right? But the burnt buildings don't create radioactive fallout. And so when you see these connotations under a lot of my videos, I put that there on purpose so you can, because gas, oil, and coal emissions don't produce plumes. This is 19.5 days. Don't produce plumes that covers the entire planet after 19.5 days. Like gas, oil, and coal emissions make carbon. Carbon, you can't have life without carbon, right? Can't have trees. You got no carbon, we'll look just like the moon. We can't exist. We can't have hair or fingernails or trees or leaves or insects or nothing. You can't have nothing without carbon. Carbon is just stardust, right? It's harmless. Everything needs it to survive. It's just recycled, right? That's what carbon really is. It's a cycle of life. But radiation creates plumes that covers the entire planet. And these plumes are pulsing energy every second. Now, this has been going on for 80 years. All the nuclear testing has created... just a single nuclear bomb will create a plume like this. Because it's hard to comprehend how many atoms we're talking about. We're talking about invisible snowstorms that cover the entire planet, but you can't perceive it, right? And it's pulsing energy, and the gammas is pulsing energy up to 600 feet every second. And it destroys the integrity of the ecosystem. The biota, the bacteria, the fungus all gets destroyed, and the ecosystem no longer functions on top of it. So after a major nuclear accident, you expect to see a lot of flash floods. It would be emblematic of radioactive fallout because it destroys the ecosystem. It can't absorb water anymore or break down the ecosystem. So water doesn't get soaked up into the earth no more because you don't have the fungus, the bacteria, and you have these major floods. But the plume itself is pulsing energy. It's an invisible snowstorm. It covers the whole planet after a couple of weeks, and it never goes away. It's pulsing energy every second. But you got 1,000 fuel pools worldwide hemorrhaging radiation into the surrounding environment. So I'm getting there. Bear with me. So when I went out and done the research expeditions, what I was looking for was species. And this is a typical day. What you're looking at there, that's a typical day of research. And what I'm looking for is these species. So normally at low tide, I will see these species. I'll be coming in beautiful colors, amazing diversity to your left. Incredible, right? That's exterminated. So this was my original research expeditions from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska, which is Vancouver, British Columbia all the way to Alaska. There's 27,000 islands. So once I went out there and discovered that all the species were actually missing and that this is an extinction event. But now to quantify that, I got to go back each year. So it's bad enough trying to fund these whole expeditions for a single year. It's insanity. But to fund the whole expedition year after year, sometimes wasn't so bad, sometimes was just a disaster. But the best way to do it, because it was so uncertain, was just to stay out there and refuse to come in until we'd done the whole coastline, and we being me. It was a very, very lonely, traumatizing experience. And that the species to your left are now eradicated permanently, because after 6 years, they didn't recover. They didn't come back. And I hit this from every direction. It's hard to comprehend how methodical I was in doing my research. And I knew that I might never get another chance. Each year might have been the last year. So I treated it with the respect that it deserved. And so in order to show you this, I went through extremes. Like what I'm doing right there is kind of an extreme. Because just doing the work itself is insane. But then trying to, I can't just articulate it. Sometimes I need to give you visuals so you can appreciate. And that's the camera that we're using right now, by the way. And that everything in that camera, I built that. I ordered it in piece by piece, everything. And then I slowly put everything together. And I ordered it all at one time, believe it or not. So I couldn't afford to go out and spend $25,000 on a real camera and just get something. And so what I done was I just slowly bought everything piece by piece. And then when I finally had it all, I built the camera. And so my memory cards basically are around $1,200. Just give you an idea of the madness of trying to accomplish the things that needed to be accomplished to tell the story. So the species to your left, these are sea anemones. And so there's 74, 76 different species of sea anemones. And each species comes in multiple vibrant colors. So there's multiple species of sponges there, for instance. Each species, around 70 plus species. Each species comes in multiple vibrant colors. There's around 76, 77 species of starfish. Each species of starfish comes in multiple vibrant colors. And sea urchins were prolific. So normally you could never put my little zodiac on a beach because you would punch a bunch of holes in it. And that these pictures are authentic before and after pictures, by the way. And so I spent an amazing amount of time, energy, and effort to quantify because we kept hoping the species would recover, right? So you go back each year and you would hope some of the species would start recovering, but they didn't. And so this traumatized me. And I got very sick from it, from being exposed into the ground zero environment. And that the plumes were constantly coming in, and I was out there on the coastline. And a lot of it washes back down to the coastlines, which is where I was hanging out twice a day. And so I would go out at nighttime too. And at nighttime, normally these tidal zones would be, when you shine your light in, you would see all kinds of little eyes from all the crabs in it. And all the predators would come down. But at the high tide line, up here, typically was 30,000 well-known insects that lived there too. Now, I also go into the forest, and I would leave audio recording equipment in the forest for several hours, and then I would go around, I would come back and go and take the audio recording, go back to my boat at nighttime, and I would fall asleep listening to the audio recordings, listening for any birds or insects or any kind of sounds, right? And it was dead silent. The insects were all gone, and the species were all gone. So my nightmares are real. It's just unbelievable. And so there was originally around 7,000 highly visible species in the tidal zones from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska. But I was true all the way to Mexico, all the way down through California, etc., right? And I methodically documented everything with GPSs. So everywhere that I went, all these pictures that I'm taking, and I was taking an average of 1,000, 2,000 pictures a day. Every 20, 30 pictures, I have a GPS, and I take a picture of the GPS. And then if someone wants to replicate the research, it was easy for them to do it, right? And for quite a while, when I was on the ocean, there was people in the comment sections all over YouTube and Facebook and other places claiming that I was out there with 45-gallon drums of bleach, and I was bleaching the beaches, because the beaches would normally look like this, all of them, the whole coastline. So the only way to get a naked beach is if you artificially exterminated the species. Now, if I had a bulldozer and went over here, for instance, and I plowed in that whole shoreline that looked like this. So it used to look like that, and then I plowed it all in and dug it all up. But when I come back in a couple of months, the species from both sides and down deeper would have filled in the gap. But they didn't. But also that the ocean itself was a soup of life. So the ocean itself would be, if you got a glass of water from the ocean, it was typically 1 billion creatures. It was the soup of life. And if you took 45-gallon drum of it and brought it to another planet that had the same kind of oxygen and pH level, theoretically you can recreate the ocean. Because a glass of water was a soup of life. In other words, so with 1 billion creatures in a glass of water, say 75 to 100 million of them were the phytoplankton. That's the basis of the food chain, the basis of the oxygen chain, the basis of the carbon sequestration chain. And the other 900 million creatures in that glass of water was the eggs, the larvae, the small fries of all the species. It's true. So when I went back year after year, and I did, and I was just demonized and vilified, and I was the worst person on the planet for going out and doing independent research. And I was the only person out there doing that. And I was out there for 4 to 5 months at a time. And I provide GPSs in all of my pictures. You'll find them up at the nuclearproctologist.org. Because Fukushima really did happen. They actually did melt down. And that the radiation covered the entire planet, not just Japan, but it certainly covered Japan. And this is not an opinion. This is a fact that is documented and documented and documented and documented in every direction you can imagine. And so we were late tonight. My apologies. I've been sick all day and had a terrible day. And I just couldn't get the show earlier. I just couldn't do it. But I couldn't just sit here either and not do it. And as sometimes happens here, the shows are a little bit late. And this is a pretty rare incident. I'm pretty reliable. And I'm very consistent. Very rarely am I early, and it's extraordinarily rare for me to be late. And that's good enough for tonight, I would imagine. Let me check the time. 12:31. So it's a half an hour after midnight my time. Now I do my shows late at night, so there's no background noises. Right, and I do that because I don't want people to be distracted, because my squeaky voice is distracting enough. And then I have a whole folder on the censorship that is stunning. 12 million yen to censor Twitter back then was about $54,000. And they never really did have very many people to censor. And it's easy money. So does anybody really think that Twitter or YouTube or Facebook or whatever is going to turn down that kind of instant? All you got to do is turn down your audience, right? Slowly, but increments, is remove your audience so they're not showing up in your feeds and stuff like that. And the censorship is just holy smoke stuff. TEPCO's worked vigilantly to shut out close scrutiny. And that's an understatement. They're originally trying to understand each reactor. Was almost impossible. And so I did have a totally different story planned for everybody tonight, and I've done all that work from 5:30 a.m. this morning, which is probably what time I'll be up again. I'll probably get up again in about 4 or 5 hours, and I'll go right back to work, because I don't know how to stop. I'm not allowed to stop. My brain won't let me. And I don't mind at all. I'm only happy when I'm working, because that is my calling. I was made to do what I'm doing. I was built specifically for this job, and I can't be deterred. And I've been threatened and attacked and shot at and arrested so many times I lost track. And no matter how sick I've been, the second that I can do a show, I'm doing a show, tell that story. And that's the best I can do. And if I had the ability, I would do a lot more. Believe you me, make no mistake about it. I would do a lot more if that was possible. And everybody that knows me knows that's true. We're going to close the poll down. We're going to call it a night. We'll pick up tomorrow night, on Thursday night. Are all nuclear power plants surrounded by farms so they can use the radioactive fallout to kill us with? Now, I'm limited to 100 caricatures when I do these polls, right? So the poll should be to make us sick, to make us incapacitated, to make us dependent upon our family members, to burden our family members so that they can't concentrate on this. They're too busy concentrating on their loved ones. They're liquidating their assets to try to give themselves or their loved ones some relief, right? The industry is not stupid, but it is sadistic and twisted and demented and vicious and hateful. And it is out to get you. So you need to stop complying. You need to fight back. I can't tell you how to individually do it. But if it's your calling, and you're cursed like I am, you can find a way. Or you can consider supporting it. Gene Attaway donated 100 today, I guess. And because all the money I've been raising for the last month, I've been buying an equipment, and even my pension is spent on equipment because it's on sale And we're pretty good right now. But I blew everything out of equipment, particularly for the last month and more, just to keep the foundation. Because I can't keep going out and buying little things all the time. Because the gas, the trips, the time, the effort, just finding the little piece, you might have to go to multiple shops. And so the pieces that I regularly need, and because I've been at this for so long, I started looking for sales and buying it in bulk. And so it was a lot of stress, a lot of effort. But I'm very happy that I've done that. I think that was an ethical thing to do. And so it's done. But I have ignored my responsibilities. That has come back to haunt me. I deal with it, and I've done that many times, unfortunately. That's the cards I'm dealt. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. I wouldn't trade you for it for anything either. I would make the folks. And it can't be done on my own, right? So have a great night. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody on tomorrow night's show. I'll try to catch up to the stuff I missed tonight. And we'll see everybody later. Have a great night, everybody. Take care.